The crystal halls of Athon Prime had stood for 40,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched young species take their first steps into the stars. They had never seen anything quite like this moment. High Arbiter Velkos stood at the center of the great chamber, his tall body glowing with soft blue light. The Silthari were beautiful creatures, standing 3 meters tall with skin that produced its own gentle glow. They believed themselves to be the wisest species in the galaxy. They had guided the Galactic Council for 10,000 years, and in all that time, they had never been wrong. Until today. Around him sat the representatives of 12 ancient species. The insectoid Keth clicked their mandibles nervously. The gas-dwelling Voron swirled in their containment spheres. The silicon-based Threll hummed with electric thoughts. All of them watched as Velkos presented his evidence. Humanity has violated the 17 Accords, he announced, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber. They have colonized a system in the neutral expanse without council approval. They have ignored 3 formal warnings. They have shown complete disregard for galactic law. The evidence floated in the air before them. Images of human ships, maps of their illegal colony, recordings of their dismissive responses to council demands. They are children, said Grand Admiral Thexorin of the Keth Dominion. His compound eyes reflected the evidence 1,000 times over. They have been traveling the stars for barely 300 years. They do not understand their place. Then we must teach them, Velkos replied. I propose a military response, a show of force that will remind them and all young species that the Council's word is law. The vote was quick. 12 hands, claws, tentacles, and energy signatures rose in agreement. The decision was unanimous. War. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in the small booth reserved for observer species. She was the only human in the chamber. She was short by Silthari standards, barely reaching their chest height. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style. Her eyes were calm, watching everything. She raised her hand. I request permission to speak on behalf of my people. Velkos looked at her the way one might look at a child interrupting adult conversation. The vote has been taken, Ambassador. There is nothing to discuss. I see. Vasquez lowered her hand. She did not argue. She did not beg. She simply nodded once and began gathering her things. As she walked toward the exit, Velkos felt something strange. It was not guilt. The Silthari rarely felt guilt, but something close to it. He floated down from his platform and approached her. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, his glow softening to what he believed was a kind shade. This does not have to end badly for your people. Surrender your colonies. Reduce your fleet to 50 vessels. Accept protectorate status under council guidance. Your species is young. You may yet learn. Vasquez stopped walking. She turned to face him, and for a moment, Velkos saw something in her eyes that he did not understand. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something else entirely. She smiled. I will pass along your terms, High Arbiter, she said. Her voice was pleasant, almost friendly. But I should warn you about something. My people have a saying, don't start none. Won't be none. She turned and walked away, leaving Velkos standing alone in the crystal hallway. His glow flickered once, twice. He told himself it was nothing, just a young species making brave sounds before their inevitable surrender. The message reached Earth in 3 hours. The quantum communication network that humanity had built, the one the Council had dismissed as crude but functional, carried Vasquez's words directly to United Terran Command. General Marcus Chen read the message twice. Then he laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had spent his entire career preparing for a moment that everyone told him would never come. He called an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs. Within 1 hour, every military leader on Earth was connected to the same secure channel. Within 2 hours, they had a plan. Within 3 hours, orders were going out to every Terran vessel in known space. The response to Ambassador Vasquez was simple. It was unprofessional. It would later become the most famous military communication in human history. Hold my beer. Across human space, ships began to move. The 7th Fleet, stationed at Proxima Centauri, received orders to hold position and prepare for contact. The 3rd Fleet, near the Tau Ceti colonies, began a quiet repositioning that would put them behind enemy lines if the Council pushed forward. The reserve ships that officially did not exist started warming up engines that had been cold for decades. On Earth, Factories that had been building civilian goods received new orders. Mining operations in the asteroid belt increased their output by 300%. Recruitment offices that usually processed a few dozen applications per month suddenly found themselves buried in volunteers. The Council expected humanity to panic. They expected desperate negotiations, tearful pleas for mercy, perhaps a few scattered attacks by extremists before the inevitable surrender. They had seen it before, many times, with many young species. They did not understand what they had started. In her quarters on Aethon Prime, Ambassador Vasquez wrote a final report to Earth. She described the Council's arrogance, their complete confidence in their own superiority, their inability to imagine that they might be wrong. They think this will be easy, she wrote. They think we will break like all the others. They have no idea what we are capable of. They have no idea what happens when you push humanity into a corner. She paused, considering her next words carefully. They have made a terrible mistake. And by the time they realize it, it will be far too late. She sent the message and began packing her things. The diplomatic phase was over. What came next would not require words. Far away, on a small blue planet that the galaxy considered unimportant, billions of humans looked up at the stars. They had always wondered if they were alone. They had always wondered if something was out there. Now they knew. And now that something was coming to destroy them, they should have been afraid. Any sensible species would have been afraid. Instead, they started preparing. They started building. They started planning. And somewhere deep in the human soul, in that strange place where courage and madness lived side by side, something woke up. Something old. Something that had been sleeping since the last Great War, waiting for a worthy challenge. The galaxy wanted a fight. Humanity was happy to give them one. The Council Armada dropped out of hyperspace like a wave of steel and fire. 10,000 warships, each one carrying weapons that could crack a planet's surface. They stretched across the void in perfect formation, a display of power that had made 100 species surrender on sight. Grand Admiral Thexoran stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Victory. His compound eyes scanned the tactical display, counting the enemy forces that awaited them. He counted once, then he counted again. Then he made a sound that, in the Keth language, roughly translated to disbelieving laughter. 42 ships. The humans had sent 42 ships to face his armada. They cannot be serious, said his second-in-command. Perhaps these are merely scouts. Perhaps their main fleet is hiding. Thexoran clicked his mandibles in amusement. Scan the system. Find their hidden forces. The scan came back empty. There was no hidden fleet. There were no reinforcements waiting in the shadows. There were only 42 human vessels hanging in space. Waiting. Open a channel, Thexoran ordered. Let us give them a chance to surrender with dignity. The communication screen flickered to life, showing a human face. The man was old by human standards, with gray hair and dark skin lined by decades of service. His uniform was simple, without the decorations that council officers loved to display. His eyes were steady. I am Grand Admiral Thexoran, of the Keth Dominion, the insectoid announced. You are outmatched and surrounded. Power down your weapons and prepare for boarding. Cooperate, and your crews will be treated fairly. The human smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. I am Admiral James Okonkwo, commander of the Terran 7th Fleet. You have entered sovereign human space without authorization. You have 60 seconds to turn around and leave. If you do not, we will consider this an act of war. Thexoran stared at the screen. In all his years of conquest, no one had ever given him a countdown. No one had ever spoken to him as if he were the one in danger. You have 42 ships, he said slowly. I have 10,000. 50 seconds. Okonkwo replied. Thexoran cut the communication. He turned to his officers, his wings buzzing with anger. These humans are either brave or stupid. Let us find out which. All ships, open fire. The first volley was devastating. Thousands of plasma cannons fired simultaneously, filling space with deadly light. The energy released was enough to vaporize a small moon. It should have ended the battle before it began. The human ships were not where the weapons landed. They moved with impossible speed, dancing through the plasma bursts like leaves in a storm. They were there, and then they were not. The Council's targeting systems, designed for enemies who moved in predictable patterns, could not track them, and then the humans fired back. Orin had never seen weapons like these. Metal projectiles, accelerated to incredible speeds by magnetic rails, punched through his ship's shields like they were not there. Strange missiles detonated in brilliant flashes, releasing beams of pure energy that cut through armor like water through sand. The Eternal Victory shook as a human destroyer swept past, raking its side with weapons fire. Orin grabbed his command chair to keep from falling. "What is happening?" he demanded. "How are they doing this?" No one could answer him. His tactical officers were too busy watching their fleet die. The human ships fought like nothing the Keth had ever seen. They did not hold formation. They did not follow predictable patterns. Each vessel seemed to operate on its own. Yet somehow they worked together perfectly. They appeared where they were not expected, struck hard, and vanished before the Council ships could respond. One human frigate, its hull torn open by enemy fire, did not retreat. Instead, it accelerated directly toward a Keth dreadnought. Orin watched in disbelief as the frigate's crew ejected into space moments before impact. The frigate hit the dreadnought at full speed, and both ships disappeared in a flash of nuclear fire. They had turned their own ship into a weapon. They had sacrificed their vessel to take an enemy down with them. "They are insane," Orin whispered. "They are completely insane." 4 hours later, it was over. 2,000 Council ships drifted dead in space. Another 1,000 were damaged beyond repair. The survivors had scattered, fleeing back toward hyperspace with their engines at maximum power. The perfect formation that had entered the system was now debris and running cowards. Human losses: 11 ships and 600 personnel. Orin sat in his command chair, watching his flagship burn around him. The Eternal Victory was dying, its systems failing one by one. Emergency lights flickered red. The smell of smoke filled the air. He reached for the communication controls with a trembling claw. He needed to warn the Council. He needed to tell them what he had learned. "This is Grand Admiral Orin." He broadcast on all frequencies. "I am transmitting to Aethon Prime with an urgent message for the High Council." Static crackled. Then a voice came through. "We are receiving, Admiral. Report." Orin closed his compound eyes. "They fight like demons," he said. "They fight without fear. They fight like they have nothing to lose. They fight like they enjoy it." He paused, gathering his strength for his final words. "Send everyone. Send every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have. And even then, I am not sure it will be enough. These humans, they are not like us. They are not like anything we have ever faced." The communication cut out as the Eternal Victory's power finally failed. Orin sat in the darkness, listening to his ship die around him, thinking about the smiling face of Admiral Okonkwo. The human had known. He had known exactly what would happen. That was why he had smiled. Far away, the survivors of the Council fleet limped back toward home. They carried with them stories that would spread across the galaxy. Stories of ships that moved like ghosts. Stories of warriors who laughed at death. Stories of a species that had looked at an overwhelming force and said, "Is that all you have?" The Council had wanted to teach humanity a lesson. Instead, humanity had taught them something they would never forget. Admiral Okonkwo stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the enemy retreat. His officers were celebrating, but he was quiet. He knew this was only the beginning. The Council would send more ships. They would keep sending them until one side or the other was destroyed. He thought about his orders from Earth. Hold the line. Buy time. Show them what we can do. He had done that. Now came the hard part. "Get me a secure channel to Earth," he said. "Tell them the first round is over, and tell them to start building more ships. We are going to need them." The news of the defeat at Proxima Centauri spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had not fought a war in thousands of years suddenly remembered where they had stored their weapons. Ancient warships, kept as museum pieces and monuments to forgotten conflicts, were brought back to life. The Council was mobilizing everything it had. High Arbiter Velkos stood before the emergency assembly, his glow dimmed by stress and lack of sleep. The crystalline halls of Aethon Prime, which had always felt eternal and safe, now seemed fragile. "We underestimated them," he admitted. "We will not make that mistake again. Every Council species will contribute to this war. We will overwhelm them with numbers. We will crush them with our combined might." The Silthari had a secret weapon. They called it the Mind Guard, an elite force of psionic warriors who could project pure terror directly into enemy minds. No species had ever resisted them. One touch of a Mind Guard's power, and even the bravest soldiers would drop their weapons and run screaming into the night. They sent the Mind Guard to the colony world of Kepler 442b, where human Marines had established a defensive position. This would be the test. This would prove that humanity could be broken. Commander Yelthin led the Mind Guard personally. She was the strongest psychic of her generation, capable of breaking 1,000 minds with a single thought. As her forces approached the human positions, she reached out with her power and touched the minds of the Marines below. She felt their hearts accelerate. She felt sweat break out on their skin. She felt the ancient fear response that existed in all living things, the desperate urge to flee from danger. And then she felt something that made no sense. The humans were afraid. Their bodies were screaming at them to run. Every instinct they had was telling them to escape. But instead of running, they got angry. The fear transformed into something else, something hot and fierce and utterly alien to Yelthin's understanding. Sergeant Maria Santos was the first to respond. Her mind was burning with terror that was not her own. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was blurring. And she was absolutely furious about it. She raised her rifle, aimed at the glowing figure of Yelthin, and shouted words that would become legendary across human space. "That the best you got, Glowstick? My drill instructor was scarier than you." She fired. The shot missed, but it did not matter. The Marines were advancing. They were terrified out of their minds, and they were advancing anyway. Some of them were laughing wild, uncontrolled laughter that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the strange place where human courage lived. Yelthin increased her power. She poured everything she had into the assault, trying to break their will. She had shattered armies with less effort. She had made warriors of a dozen species collapse and weep. The humans kept coming. For the first time in her life, Yelthin felt something she had only ever inflicted on others. She felt fear. Real fear. The kind that came from facing something you did not understand. "Retreat," she ordered. "Fall back to the landing zone." The Mind Guard retreated. The most feared warriors in the galaxy turned and ran from a group of ordinary human soldiers. The reports that reached Aethon Prime were disturbing. The Silthari had never failed before. Their power had always been absolute. Now it was meaningless. But the Council had other advantages. The Keth, with their hive mind connection, could coordinate thousands of soldiers as if they were one organism. Their swarm tactics had overwhelmed countless enemies. Humanity developed countermeasures within weeks. Electronic warfare systems that disrupted the Keth neural link, cutting individual soldiers off from the collective. For a Keth, being alone in their own head was worse than death. They were used to the constant presence of millions of minds. The silence drove them mad. The Threll, beings of living crystal who communicated through vibrations, found themselves facing sonic weapons that shattered their bodies into pieces. The Voron, who existed as clouds of gas in specialized containment spheres, discovered that humans had developed chemicals that neutralized their atmosphere in seconds. Every advantage the Council had, humanity found a way to counter. Every weapon they developed, humans learned to defeat. It was as if the entire species existed in a constant state of evolution, adapting to each new threat faster than should have been possible. A Keth anthropologist named Vexthi was assigned to study human media, their movies, their books, their games. She needed to understand how they thought. What she found terrified her. "They have never stopped fighting," she reported to the Council. "Their entire history is violence. They fought their own planet for survival. They fought each other over resources, over beliefs, over things they call sports. They exposed their children to simulated warfare as entertainment." She displayed images from human history. Wars that had killed millions. Weapons that could destroy cities. Conflicts that had nearly ended their species multiple times. "We achieved peace and then we stopped," Vexthi continued. "We saw no need to continue developing weapons or training soldiers. But humans achieved peace and kept practicing. They built arenas where they simulate combat for fun. They created games where they practice strategy and violence. Every generation has refined their ability to fight." High Arbiter Velkos stared at the images. Human children playing war games, human adults watching violent entertainment, an entire culture built around conflict. They were preparing for this, he realized. They did not know we existed, but they were preparing for us anyway. Meanwhile, the war was changing. Human strike forces began appearing in places they should not have been able to reach. The Council relied on established hyperspace lanes, safe routes through unstable space that had been mapped over thousands of years. Humans, it turned out, had been exploring dangerous new paths, routes that passed through radiation storms and gravity wells, routes that no sane species would attempt. Supply depots exploded without warning. Shipyards burned. Communication stations went silent. The humans called it asymmetric warfare, using small forces to cause massive damage. The Council called it impossible. Admiral Okonkwo's reputation grew with each victory. The Council put a bounty on his head large enough to buy a small planet. Assassins were sent. None returned. On Earth, the war effort was accelerating. Factories ran day and night. Scientists worked on new weapons, new shields, new ways to hurt the enemy. Volunteers continued to flood recruitment centers, and every one of them had the same look in their eyes. Not fear, not anger, something else. Excitement. General Chen watched the latest batch of recruits march past his window. Young men and women from every corner of Earth, all of them eager to fight an enemy that had threatened their home. They should be terrified, his aide commented. We are facing the combined might of 12 ancient species. We are outgunned and outnumbered. Chen smiled. It was the same smile that Vasquez had given Velkos. The same smile that Okonkwo had shown Thexoran. They are not terrified, he said. They are thrilled. For generations, we wondered if we were alone in the universe. Now we know we are not. And the first aliens we meet try to conquer us. He laughed quietly. This is what humanity was made for. This is the challenge we have been waiting for. Outside, the recruits began their training. They would learn to fight in ways that would make the galaxy tremble. They would learn to face fear and turn it into fury. They would learn what it meant to be human. The Council had started this war thinking it would be easy. They were beginning to understand just how wrong they had been. 6 months had passed since the first battle. The Council had expected humanity to exhaust itself by now. They had expected resources to run dry, morale to crumble, the desperate enthusiasm of the early days to fade into despair. They were wrong. Human industrial capacity had not decreased. It had tripled. Shipyards that had produced 1 vessel per month were now producing 10. Asteroid mining operations worked around the clock, converting raw rock into weapons and ammunition. Civilian factories had been rebuilt for military production, and their workers approached their tasks with a dedication that puzzled Council analysts. They are not forced, one Keth observer reported in confusion. They volunteer for extra shifts. They compete with each other to produce more. They treat the war effort as a team sport. The human economy, which should have collapsed under the pressure of total war, was actually growing. People were working harder than ever before, not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to win. Admiral Okonkwo stood before a massive holographic display, studying the positions of every fleet in the war. His forces had grown from the original 42 ships to over 20,000. More were being completed every day. The defensive phase of the war was ending. It was time to attack. The Council believes we are weak, he told his officers. They believe we are survivors, hiding in our corner of space, waiting for them to finish us off. Today, we show them the truth. We are not survivors. We are predators. Aniduber. The target was Athon Prime itself, the seat of Council power. Intelligence indicated that the Council had gathered their remaining forces around their capital. More than 50,000 ships protecting the heart of their civilization. It was the largest concentration of military power in galactic history. Okonkwo planned to destroy it. The combined Terran Armada jumped into the Athon system on a cold Tuesday morning, Earth time. 30,000 human vessels emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. The Council defenders had expected an attack eventually. They had not expected it to come so soon, or with such force. Alarms screamed across the defense grid. Admirals shouted orders. Ships scrambled to their positions. High Arbiter Velkos watched from his chambers as the human fleet approached. His glow had faded to almost nothing over the past months, worn down by stress and sleepless nights. He had aged centuries in half a year. How many? He asked quietly. 30,000, his aide reported. We still outnumber them significantly. Numbers do not matter against these creatures, Velkos replied. Send in the Mind Guard. Send in everything. The Battle of Aethon Prime began with fire and fury. Council ships unleashed everything. They had plasma cannons, particle beams, mass drivers, weapons that had been developed over thousands of years. The space between the fleets filled with deadly light. The human ships answered with their own weapons. Railguns punched through shields and armor. Nuclear missiles detonated against enemy hulls. Laser batteries swept across formations, cutting through vessels like scythes through grain. But humanity had brought something new. The Silthari Mind Guard, fresh from their shameful defeat on Kepler 442b, had prepared new tactics. They would not attack individual soldiers this time. They would combine their power, creating a wave of psychic energy that would overwhelm entire ships at once. No one, not even humans, could resist the combined strength of 10,000 psychics. They reached out with their minds, preparing to strike. Nothing happened. The humans had deployed the Eclipse system satellites that generated a field disrupting all psionic activity. The technology was crude by council standards, but it worked. The Mind Guard found themselves cut off from their power, ordinary beings without their greatest weapon. Commander Yelthin felt the silence in her mind like a physical blow. Her entire life, she had been special. She had been powerful. Now she was just another soldier. And the enemy was coming. Fall back, she ordered, her voice shaking. We cannot fight them like this. The Mind Guard retreated, and with them went one of the Council's greatest advantages. The Keth fared no better. Human electronic warfare systems targeted their neural links, severing the connection between individual soldiers and the collective. For creatures who had never been alone in their own heads, it was devastating. Some Keth simply stopped fighting, overwhelmed by the sudden isolation. Others went mad, unable to cope with the silence. Grand Admiral Thexoren, who had survived the destruction of the Eternal Victory and been given command of a new flagship, watched his forces crumble around him. They have countered everything, he said in disbelief. Every advantage we had, they have taken away. They learned from us, his tactical officer replied. Every battle. They studied our tactics and developed responses. They adapted faster than we thought possible. How? They have been spacefaring for 3 centuries. We have had millennia to perfect our methods. The answer came from an unlikely source, a human transmission intercepted by Keth communications. You want to know our secret? Admiral Okonkwo's voice echoed across the battlefield. We never assume we are finished. Every battle is a lesson. Every defeat is a teacher. Every victory shows us where we can improve. You looked at your ancient traditions and saw perfection. We looked at them and saw weakness. The human ships pressed forward, exploiting every gap in the Council defenses. They moved like a living thing, each vessel supporting the others, creating openings that were immediately filled by follow-up attacks. By the end of the first day, the Council had lost 15,000 ships. Human losses were 3,000. By the end of the second day, the Council fleet was in full retreat. Their formation had collapsed. Their commanders were dead or fleeing. The great defense of Aethon Prime had become a disaster. Okonkwo could have pressed the attack. He could have chased the fleeing ships, destroyed them one by one, eliminated the Council's ability to wage war forever. Some of his officers urged him to do exactly that. Instead, he stopped. Secure the space around Aethon Prime, he ordered. Establish a perimeter, but do not advance further. Do not fire on civilian targets. Do not pursue retreating vessels unless they turn to fight. Sir? His second-in-command questioned. We have them beaten. Why stop now? Okonkwo looked at the crystal world turning slowly before them. Millions of Silthari lived there, along with countless other species. Civilians, children, people who had nothing to do with the war. Because we are not conquerors, he said. We are defenders. We came here to show them that they cannot defeat us. We did not come here to become monsters. He opened a channel to the planet below, broadcasting on all frequencies. This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Terran Navy. Your fleet has been defeated. Your defenses have fallen. We could destroy your world, but we will not. We are not your enemies. We never wanted to be. Your leaders started this war. We are here to finish it. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. We could end you. Remember that when you consider your next move. But we would rather talk. The choice is yours. On Aethon Prime, High Arbiter Velkos listened to the human admiral's words. Outside his window, he could see the human fleet hanging in space victorious, powerful, and choosing not to destroy. For the first time in his long life, he understood that he had been wrong about everything. These humans were not barbarians. They were not monsters. They were something far more dangerous. They were people who knew exactly how powerful they were, and chose to show mercy anyway. He reached for his communication device, his hands trembling. It was time to end this war. The war ended not with a surrender, but with a question. High Arbiter Velkos agreed to meet Ambassador Elena Vasquez on neutral ground, a small station in the empty space between their territories. He came alone, as she had requested. His advisors had warned him it might be a trap, but he no longer cared about such things. He needed to understand. Vasquez was waiting for him when he arrived. She looked exactly as she had during their last meeting, months ago in the crystal halls of Aethon Prime. The same practical hairstyle, the same calm eyes, the same strange smile that had haunted his dreams. She stood barely 1.5 meters tall. He towered over her, his 3-meter frame casting a shadow across the room. Yet somehow, he was the one who felt small. How? He asked. It was the only word he could manage. Vasquez considered the question for a long moment. You want the honest answer? Or the diplomatic one? Honest. Please. She gestured to the viewport behind her, where stars burned in the endless darkness. You see all that? The void, the radiation, the hostile worlds, the distances that would crush any hope? The universe has been trying to kill us since we crawled out of the mud. And every single time, we looked at oblivion and said the same thing. She stepped closer, and despite himself, Velkos moved back. Is that all you've got? The words hung in the air between them. Simple words. Defiant words. Words that contained everything Velkos needed to know about humanity. Ice ages tried to freeze us, Vasquez continued. Plagues tried to wipe us out. Asteroids nearly ended our world. We survived them all. We fought our own planet for the right to exist. We fought each other, over and over again, until we finally learned to work together. We clawed our way to the stars through blood and fire and determination. She met his eyes, and in that moment, he saw something ancient looking back at him. Not just Elena Vasquez, but all of humanity, every ancestor who had refused to die, every survivor who had passed their stubborn defiance down through generations. You think a bunch of aliens who've been sitting comfortable for 40,000 years are going to be the thing that finally stops us? You stopped fighting. You stopped growing. You looked at your perfect civilization and decided you had nothing left to learn. We never stopped. We never will. Velkos's glow had faded to almost nothing. He felt hollow, emptied of everything he had believed about himself and his people. What do you want? He asked quietly. Vasquez's expression softened slightly. We want a seat at the table, equal membership in the council, fair access to hyperspace lanes and trade routes, recognition that we earned our place among the stars. We want to be treated as equals, not as children, to be disciplined. And if we refuse, the softness vanished. Then we take the table and build a new one. Without you. It was not a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. She was telling him what would happen. The way one might describe the weather. Velkos closed his eyes. His glow flickered once, twice, and then steadied. When he spoke, his voice was calm. I will recommend to the council that we accept your terms. I believe they will agree. Vasquez nodded. Good. I'm glad we could work this out. The Treaty of Aethon was signed 1 week later. Humanity became the 13th member of the Galactic Council, the first species to earn membership through what the official documents carefully called assertive negotiation. At the signing ceremony, representatives from all 12 original council species gathered to witness the moment. Many of them still carried the trauma of the war. The Silthari, who had faced human marines, the Keth, who had experienced the silence of broken neural links, the officers who had watched their fleets burn. A young Keth diplomat named Vex approached Ambassador Vasquez during the reception. She was the same anthropologist who had studied human media during the war, and she had a question that had been burning in her mind. Ambassador, she said, our analysts have studied your species extensively. We understand your resilience, your creativity, your aggression. But one thing we cannot explain, during the worst moments of the war when your casualties mounted, when our forces pushed deep into your territory, your soldiers did not despair. They laughed. Why? Vasquez considered the question. Around them, the reception continued, aliens and humans mingling awkwardly, trying to find common ground after months of trying to kill each other. Because, she said finally, we've been waiting for this. Our whole lives, we looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. We built telescopes to search for signals. We sent probes into the void hoping to find something. And now we know. There's a whole galaxy of civilizations out there, thousands of years more advanced than us, and we just went toe-to-toe with all of them. She smiled, and this time there was nothing threatening in it, just pure, genuine joy. And we won. Why wouldn't we laugh? This is the most fun we've had in centuries. Vex stared at her, trying to process this answer. The concept was alien to everything she understood about psychology and survival. But slowly, she began to understand. Humans did not fight despite their fear. They fought because of it. They took the terror of facing impossible odds and transformed it into something else entirely. Something that made them stronger instead of weaker. Something that made them laugh in the face of death. It was terrifying. It was inspiring. It was completely, utterly human. 50 years later, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Human music played in clubs on 100 worlds. Human cuisine had become a delicacy that species traveled light years to taste. Human engineers worked alongside Keth architects, building wonders that neither species could have imagined alone. Human philosophers debated with Silthari mystics, each learning from the other. The council had changed too. New rules had been written, many of them proposed by humanity. Young species were no longer dismissed or threatened. The ancient powers had learned, painfully, that age did not equal wisdom. And in the halls of the reformed Galactic Council, there was a new saying. It was passed from species to species, repeated in a dozen different languages, taught to children as a lesson and a warning. Never corner a human. They might decide to come out fighting, and they might decide they like it. Admiral Okonkwo, long retired, spent his final years on a small colony world far from Earth. He grew vegetables, watched the stars, and occasionally spoke to young officers who came to hear his stories. They always asked the same question, "How did you know you could win?" And he always gave the same answer. "I didn't," he would say. None of us did. The odds were against us. The enemy was stronger, older, more advanced. By any rational calculation, we should have lost. He would pause then, looking up at the night sky where alien stars burned alongside familiar ones. But you see, we're not rational creatures. Not really. We're the descendants of apes who looked at fire and decided to grab it anyway. We're the children of survivors who faced extinction again and again and refused to quit. We don't calculate odds. We just keep going. He would smile, the same smile that had terrified Grand Admiral Thexoran so many years ago. The council asked if that was all we had. The answer was no. That was just the beginning. We always have more. We always find a way. That's what makes us human. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a young species was looking up at the stars for the first time, wondering if they were alone. They were not alone. And when they finally reached out, humanity would be waiting not to conquer them, not to threaten them, but to welcome them. Because in the end, that was the real lesson of the war. Humanity did not fight because they loved violence. They fought because they loved something else more. They loved life. They loved freedom. They loved the endless possibility of tomorrow. And they would fight anything, gods, monsters, or ancient alien councils to protect it. That was all they had. That was everything.